Miles Morales is not a typical superhero. He's a teenager, he's biracial, and he doesn't really believe in himself. But then he turns out to be the best Spider-Man of them all. Sparkplug coffee is not an unusual choice of refreshment, though. Even mixed-race teens who need a shot of confidence can get down with this stuff. If they drink coffee, maybe not. They're that young. And even though Sparkplug originates in this country of Canada, a New Yorker like Miles can also get what he orders within a week. His neighbors to the north will get their shipments in a week or less, too. But those Canuckers, like us, don't even have to pay for shipping. And what Canadians and Americans are ordering are the freshest, fairly traded, premium Arabica beans that you'll find in all of Canada. They've got a wide assortment of blends and roasts, and they even provide you with a choice of seasonal blends that rotate every couple of months. Not surprisingly, they give you the option of snagging some half-calf or decaf. But once Miles is done taking down the Kingpin, he really should take the time to become a member of the Autopilot Coffee Club. Take down the Kingpin, very important, then a member. That'll get him, or anyone, perks and deals that the I'll just order once in a while types won't get. And Miles will save money on every order. He can also customize to get those orders when it suits him, so he can take heart in knowing that this is certainly not a Coffee of the Month club. Sparkplug.coffee/HYES is the destination for this young prodigy to go to in his browser to save 20% off his next order. That HYES promo code is not only the key to keeping some dollars in this penny-pinching young guy's pocket, it also gives Have You Ever Seen a little taste of money, too. All right, I've been in sell mode for quite a while here. It's about time Bev gets some words in, so let's make that happen. But first, Andrew Luther, cue up your one-man band.
And action. Have you ever seen
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? Hello to all you friendly neighborhood podcast listeners, and thanks for checking out the 514th Thwip Thwip of Have You Ever Seen? I love that Peter Parker actually calls it Thwip Thwip, which I believe was always in the word balloons in the comics. We gaze at classic films, usually from a lot longer ago than 2018, and we make sure to spoil them as completely as we can. I'm the guy who's trying to flunk out of college and who never learned how to touch a girl's shoulder and say, hey. See? Did it badly there. Hey. Ryan Ellis. And here's the lady who speaks in pop-up word balloons and is currently in the wrong dimension, my wife Bev.
That's me.
You belong somewhere else. Go back there, would you? I'll help you get back. With the goober. All right, the coming attractions opinion question. Wait, no, you're my wife. You're staying here. Okay, so the question. Which is your favorite version of the various Spider-Men, or Spider-Women, or Spider-Pigs, or Spider-Whatevers in Into the Spider-Verse?
I guess there's a spider among the spiders.
You can pick him if you want
right?
to.
Well, I know that a big part of the reason that I love this particular spider hero is because the film uses him very sparsely and leaves us wanting more, but I just love Spider-Ham. He's so delightfully off the wall and irreverent, and I love John Mulaney. That doesn't hurt at all. And I discovered that there was a 4-minute long Spider-Ham short that came as part of the Blu-ray, and I found it on YouTube. And any other fellow Spider-Ham or Peter Porker fans out there, it's delightful. Please check it out.
I like Jake Johnson as Peter B. Parker quite a lot in this, but Nicolas Cage as Spider-Man Noir. Despite not really getting to do or say all that much in this film, brings the biggest smile to my face. He's a mixture of cool and goofy.
This is an embarrassment of riches. I was really
Miles is great.
Really, I should just say
Gwen's
Miles.
Great.
Because I love Miles as a Spider-Man so much. And there have been some great Spider-Mans over the years. You and I covered Spider-Man 2, and I still think that Tobey Maguire was a great Spider-Man, especially in that movie. We both love Tom Holland as Spider-Man. And in this movie, every spider hero is just wonderful. They make such a great team together, and they're so different. And there's just not a dud in the bunch.
Yeah, I agree. Bit of a loaded question. It's funny with all the trivia about this movie that there was online. I guess I hadn't read the trivia before I thought of that question. That's the best I could come up with as to who's your favorite spider. But anyway, interesting enough.
Sparked a fun little conversation there.
You chose the pig and I chose Noir. Okay, the third animated movie we've covered in June, believe it or not, because I did Moana briefly on June 2nd, and June the 1st we covered Finding Nemo. Anyway, the third one in June. The Trippy Arachnid was released by Columbia and Sony Pictures Animation 5 years ago on December 14th, 2018. It was not cheap to make. The film cost about $90 million, but it went on to gross $384 million worldwide. And the sequel comes out in a few days, and I bet it makes, I don't know, who can really say, but maybe half that first weekend.
It's riding on a tsunami of goodwill. This film is so well loved.
It wouldn't even be shocking if it made that much in the first weekend worldwide, actually. Okay, well, this movie is 5 years old, Bev. Please remind us what it's about. Give us a skinny on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Okay. let's do this one last time. Miles Morales is a regular teenage kid in Brooklyn until he's bitten by a radioactive spider, gets superpowers, witnesses his uncle's murder, and then takes down a supervillain to save New York City. Okay, I should also mention that supervillain, Kingpin, opens up a portal to multiple alternate dimensions, inadvertently drawing spider people from 5 different universes. These diverse heroes work together to initiate Miles, take down Kingpin, and go back through the portal to their own dimensions.
Or, in a nutshell, Cops Kid Conquers Criminal Killer, in honor of Peter Parker and most of the Spider-Man we've ever watched being a newspaper guy. He's a newspaper man with J. Jonah Jameson, that menace! Well, Spider-Man's the menace. Okay, well, there are some pretty great numbers on this film, not surprisingly. One of the reasons they're making another one is because, yes, it was a hit, but it also was so critically acclaimed and beloved 5 years ago. Rotten Tomatoes, 97% of critics there like the film. 8.8 out of 10 is the average. There are 398 reviews and 93% of audiences. Man, it's 66th on the IMDb 250. It was 15th at the 2018 US box office. We covered these 3 movies. Very different. A Star is Born was 11th. We covered that earlier this year. Green Book, which won Best Picture, was 36th. And Hereditary was 67th. They're all in the archive somewhere on this channel. This film won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. Went to Phil Lord, Christopher Miller, Peter Ramsey, Bob Persichetti, and Rodney Rothman. Most of the 5 guys spoke, and they all talked about being seen and being powerful, which is a blatant message at the end of this film, too, or a lot of the film, I guess, really. And the competition for that award was Incredibles 2, Isle of Dogs, Mirai, I don't think I've seen that one, and Ralph Breaks the Internet. That's a pretty great group of movies.
Yeah.
This was the easy choice. I think it was one of those, it's going to win, going into the night type choices. But Incredibles 2 was, I think, the biggest hit of that year. And Isle of Dogs and Ralph Breaks the Internet were pretty great competition. I guess Mirai was, I don't know for sure. Anyway, I know you love this movie. It's one reason we decided to do it now, leading into the sequel. Not quite 5 years old. It was your second favorite movie of the decade,
I was going to say, you forgot one important stat of this one particular amateur critic who named this her second favorite film of the decade.
And it didn't make...
After Hereditary.
All right. Didn't make my top 10, but I thought it was an excellent film. Anyway, go ahead with your thoughts.
So obviously I love this movie. But beyond the delight I get from watching it, it's an orgy of creativity, storytelling genius. I also think that this film could be the bridge to the future of animation. I read that Rian Johnson called it the Velvet Underground of superhero films, which I assume is meant to refer to this famous notion that the Velvet Underground only sold 1,000 copies of their first record, but all 1,000 people who bought a copy of that record started a band. So this film is bound to be tremendously influential because it has turned animation style on its head in a way that I think woke people up in the way that all animation has become a little homogenous. And it does that without sacrificing one bit of imagination or care paid to character development and story. The love and creativity that is poured into every frame of this film is a gift. And I think it is a gift that will keep giving for generations of animators.
Well, we're going to find out in a few days with Across the Spider-Verse, but has anyone made a movie anything like this in the 5 years since? Now, of course, animation takes time to influence the genre, because you can't just make a movie the next year that's just like this if you didn't know this existed. But the care and attention that went into this film is unbelievable. But has there been anything that you can think of?
I was looking it up, and the closest thing I could find was that they used the same process, because they invented a process to create the look of this film, which was superlaying 2D animation on top of 3D animation. They used it again for The Mitchells versus the Machines.
Okay, that makes sense.
And it was used
I like that one.
Oh, yeah. Another Lord&Miller hit, big time. And it was also used in the latest Puss in Boots. But any film that wants to look like this, even if they started making it immediately after this film came out, it still might not be ready. Although that's not totally true because they've been making a sequel, but animation takes so long, and you don't even need us to tell you. If you've seen this film, you know it took a tremendous amount of work. There's so many little details that show up for literally a frame here and there. Like all the, what's the word, onomatopoeia?
Yeah.
That's the word for when you hear a kaboom, and then on the screen you see the word kaboom. You were talking about this earlier, the thwick thwick, what is it? The
Thwip.
Thwip thwip.
Peter calls it thwip.
The word describes exactly what it sounds like. All those touches that...
Well, thwip isn't a word, by the way, because
it's
online did flag it when I was trying to put in my notes.
A lot of onomatopoeia isn't technically words, and a lot of what they use in the film is just like a language representation of what you would hear. it's so dense with touches, dense with details.
There are a ton of movies you could say this about and it would be true. And it does take me back to when Roger Ebert would do it. Maybe other people have. I've never heard anyone else ever talk about this, though. A frame-by-frame analysis. Film classes must do this at some point. But he would do this with, I guess, film fans. I'm not really sure. I know he talked about it in his reviews, though, sometimes. And I'm sure he chose great movies to do that with. This movie almost demands, if you really want to watch it, truly watch it, it would be frame by frame. Because I guess the point was, you stop it and anybody can, and as long as you need to be. If you need to talk about one frame for 25 minutes, you talk about that frame for 25, 30, 40 minutes. And some of these wouldn't be that long, granted, but you'd be saying, that thing in the background.
Yeah.
Maybe you noticed it, but you didn't really have a chance to truly focus on it when it's going by so fast. This movie's 2 full hours. The sequel apparently is 2:20, because every movie's an epic anymore, it seems. But then maybe that will feel like this did, which is not 2 hours long. This movie flies by, and yet you could stop it, look at every little piece and say, I didn't see that before, or I thought I did, but I couldn't quite focus on that. And probably laugh at just a still frame image or marvel at it. This movie is one of the best looking movies we've seen in a very long time.
And it creates images I've literally never seen before. There's been this trend in animation ever since Toy Story. Digital animation, of course, it's so dazzling, it looks so beautiful, and the goal has been to get as close to photorealism as we can. And you would see that obviously in the way that CGI is combined with live action, and virtually any large budget movie is probably going to have some element of this, but especially when you look at stuff like the Marvel films or Lord of the Rings. But the example that comes to mind pretty sharply for me is the live action, I'm using quotes, Lion King, which is a movie that was advertised as live action, even though it's almost entirely animation. There may have been some real sets in there, but it's pretty much all created in animation, but their goal was to make it look as realistic as possible. It's a noble goal because it has pushed animation so far to be capable of anything. And then here this movie comes along and says, okay, but what if I'm sick of that? Nobody really liked the look of the live-action Lion King. It's not better than the classically animated film that came out in the 90s.
A big part of the problem with that movie is that, yeah, they got mostly black people to voice it. I know that's important, and it is important, granted. If you're going to redo it, then you're going to have a lot fewer white people in the cast. But the movie wasn't as funny as I recall, especially Timon and Pumbaa. Nothing against the two guys that play them. It's Rogan and I think, what's his name again? Man on the Street guy.
Billy Eichner,
I believe he plays.
2 white guys.
That's true, yeah, and John Oliver's in it too. But anyways, mostly black people. The point being, the movie didn't have a soul compared to the movie that was made in 1994.
Yeah, because they couldn't let the animals have human expressions.
That's right. And this movie, one of the best things about it, we just said it looks unbelievable. It also has a great soul, and it's funny.
Oh, it's so funny.
Pixar at their best. We talked about Pixar at the beginning of the month with Finding Nemo. That's a good example.
Very funny movie.
A movie that looks unbelievable even 20 years later, has a soul, and is very funny. This one fits in that same boat. Made by Sony, so a different company. But one of the problems with animation I find these days is I don't really care about the movies the same way I did the old ones. And I'm not trying to pull that, well, they're not like they used to be. I want them to wow me, which they sometimes do, and then I don't really care anymore. I liked Incredibles 2. I haven't seen it a second time. I keep on meaning to. There's a lot of Pixar stuff and Disney stuff I meant to see a second time and still haven't done it. And I think it's because they don't make me want to watch it the way that I still will watch Toy Story 1 or 2 or even 3 over and over. This one I might watch over and over as well. It's on Netflix. That's how we saw it. If you make it that available, I might go back to this in 6 months to a year.
Well, one of the many superlatives I would apply to Into the Spider-Verse would be it is the most refreshing animated film I have seen in over a decade. And I can watch, say, Inside Out, which I think is a marvel of storytelling. Technically, it's so imaginative, but it looks like every other Pixar film, which I guess that's just the trap you're going to fall into if you're a studio that is that attached to your style. Not to say there's anything wrong with that. I still think Pixar's quality is going downhill. That could be for many reasons, but there's also a little bit of Pixar fatigue.
One of the few exceptions to the 2010s, I should say, was Inside Out. Most of them were just okay or not even all that great. That, to me, is one of their very best ever.
I liked Soul a lot, too.
Yeah, not in the very best ever category.
But it's not as good as Inside Out, it's true. But my point was that they've been doing the same thing since Toy Story. When did that come out? 95? Yeah. 94? 95. We're pushing 30 years of seeing the same. Well, when this movie came out, it was more like 23 years. That animation style has been so dominant. It's beautiful, but God, is it refreshing to see something that's so different, and it's exciting, and it's using color palettes that we haven't seen in any movie in decades. Because, of course, the other thing is that I guess it's easier to create digital media that's gray or brown looking. The overwhelming color palette is so dreary and dull. In all of these, quote, live-action Disney remakes, they all have this really ugly look. You could bring it back to even, like,
at least mediocre,
Christopher Nolan. Okay, fine. It's a trend to have these really underwhelming, bleak color palettes in films right now, and then Spider-Verse comes out, and it's pink and teal, really contrasty and bright and poppy.
Not every movie can do that, too. You have to make that make sense in your story. But yes, that's one of the things that stands out, too, about this movie. It's very colorful. I think it's Orson Welles that said about movies, they're called movies, let's make a move. Or maybe it's Howard Hawks. Could have been Hawks. But whoever that was that said that, you're right. They were right. And too many movies feel like they don't move. I think our next week's movie, you might say that about. We'll talk about that leading into it later at the end of the show.
No spoilers, right?
But what about the characters? Because there's a lot of those to get through. Miles is the main character, of course, Miles Morales. I read online he has his mother's last name, not his father's, because his father's last name is Davis. Jefferson
He'd be
Davis.
Miles Davis.
Right. And then Jefferson Davis, for that matter, is a Civil War traitor, basically, to America.
I'm Canadian, and I don't know.
But he has his mother's last name because his dad was undercover with S.H.I.E.L.D. I guess this is in the comics.
Oh.
An underrated Spider-Man in this movie, by the way, too, is Chris Pine, because he is the one who opens the movie. He is Peter Parker in the universe where Miles is as well. Miles is just a kid. Peter dies battling Green Goblin and Kingpin. And, of course, we find out about the Collider, too. I have a quote in my notes here. I don't remember who said it now. We watched the movie about a week ago, but there's only one Spider-Man. I think that was him that said that, right?
When he's doing his big introduction at the beginning, he's like, I'm the one and only Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm. But then, of course, we get, was it 5 or even 6 more?
Yes. Well, there's 5 plus Miles, so there's 6.
One of the funny moments I think is in the trailer, too, is when his dad embarrasses him at school. He drives him to school in his police car, but then, tell me you love me. And he uses the radio to embarrass him in front of everybody.
A refreshing thing that it's a nice, healthy relationship that he has with his parents. He has a very happy home life.
But Miles is in an elitist school, which he's trying to fail out of. He's trying to quit because he doesn't want to be there anymore, which does seem like a modern thing as well. And that could be in the comic, I guess. But it feels like the kind of thing where some socially aware kid would say, I don't belong here. This school is supposed to be better, but Miles doesn't want better.
Well, he doesn't want different. He wants to be back where all of his friends are. Because you see the scene where he's passing all of his friends and they're saying hi, saying they miss him. And then he goes to the school where he doesn't know anybody, doesn't feel like he fits in. And you definitely get the impression that he was the big fish in the little pond at his old school. And then at this school, suddenly it's very competitive. And every kid that goes to that school is smart. And he doesn't stand out anymore. Right, okay. He doesn't have that kind of advantage anymore. At Visions.
Visions, right. But it's visiting Uncle Aaron that becomes the inciting incident because they go down to do graffiti in the subway. After the hay scene, of course, where Uncle Aaron shows him that. Mahershala Ali, well cast, doesn't have a lot of screen time in this, but he's pretty good as Uncle Aaron. Great voice, of course. And he was also in Green Book the same year as this, so he was in the Best Picture winner and won an Oscar himself for that, and then was in this.
I was doing like a little calculation on how many Oscar nominees are in this movie. And it's quite a bit, because you've got Haley Steinfeld. Now you got Tyree Henry, who plays...
right.
Miles' dad, who's been Oscar nominated.
Cage, who won.
Cage. Yeah.
And then people that have played, or will play, in some cases, superheroes in other films. Cage, of course, played Ghost Rider. Haley Steinfeld is now Kate Bishop. She wasn't at this point, but now she's played Kate Bishop. And Ali is supposed to be Blade at some point.
Oh, that's right. Now, Pine... He's been Wonder Captain Woman. Kirk, but okay, yeah. So he's not like a superhero, but he's a superhero.
He is Wonder Woman. Yeah. Or actually her boyfriend. But anyway, yes, so the spider does bite Miles' hand, which is always canon in the Spider-Man films.
With a great laugh. There's a big dramatic moment, and they show the venom entering his blood, and it cuts back to him and wide, and he just slaps the spider and flicks it off of himself.
Because he'll feel like nothing at the time.
Yeah.
He goes to school, and he flirts with Gwen. He meets her, and... tries to do the hay thing. He's not cool. He gets his hand stuck in her hair, and that's why she has that funky haircut later on, because they had to cut her hair to get his hand out. He doesn't know why that's happening. I think all Spider-Men at that point where my hands are all sticky, which is always that play on a teenage boy dealing with different reasons why his hands are sticky. Wash your hands, kids. Is it really that hard? But that also implies that Gwen's already come through the portal, and yet the Collider scene happens later on, when he goes back to the graffiti they had done, not knowing his uncle is also the Prowler, which we'll get to in a second. But he finds that the Chris Pine version, so the actual Peter Parker of this universe, is fighting the giant Green Goblin, this monstrous version. And then Kingpin opens up the multiverse thing, and that's how we get Gwen, and how we get Spider-Pig, and how we get Noir, and so on, into this universe. And yet Gwen was already there.
They talk about on the news about how there was an earthquake in the Bronx. Actually, he talks about it with his friends when he's on his way to school. Did you feel that earthquake last night? And they reference the fact that they have turned on the collider and it was successful when it's Doc Ock talking to...
Right, okay.
Yeah. So we knew it happened. It was just off screen.
Right, so this other time is at least the second time. This is very smart on the part of the writers. So the writing credits are Phil Lord and Rodney Rothman. Lord gets story credit. Miller's a producer, but he's not a writer. He did get an Oscar with the other guys. And the directors are Persichetti, Ramsey, and Rothman. It's funny because you think of it being a Lord and Miller film, so they'd be directors, but they're not even directors.
No, it's true.
The team is somewhat changed, if not largely changed, for the sequel. Most of the actors are back, it seems like. Not everybody, but a lot of them are back for the sequel.
Are Lord and Miller still
They're still
writing?
Involved as producers, yeah. And I'm not sure who's responsible for this, but I think it's a very smart thing that the villain, Kingpin, who's absolutely a villain, no doubt about that, but does have a very noble goal. He just wants his wife and his son back, who died in the other universe. But if I go to this other universe with this collider thing that Olivia Octavius has helped me build, I can get them from this universe. Which is weird to think that that version of him in that universe would be losing the wife and son there. But I guess he's that selfish. He doesn't care about his other self either.
Yeah, you say it's a noble goal. I think it's incredibly
more
selfish
noble than
and
some
short-sighted.
goals.
I think that Kingpin is maybe the closest thing there is in this film to a weakness, and that Kingpin is a pretty blah villain. He looks cool, I guess, and everything.
Well voiced.
Yeah, Liev Schreiber is the voice. Schreiber, sorry. His story feels inconsistent. Like he's either a merciless psycho who would risk the entire city, order the hit of a teenager, or he's a loving husband and father who needs another chance with his family.
Why can't he be both?
I agree that he could be both. I just found him a bore, and I didn't think there was that much of an elegant connection between his story and Miles' story either.
You know why I bring it up is because we just got finished watching our next movie, which involves Al Pacino, and it's Serpico. It's right between Godfather and Godfather Part 2. And yes, he's a villain. Michael does so many terrible things in his life and the storyline of those three movies. But he also tells himself, just like Cranston does in Breaking Bad, he's doing it for his family. And yeah, a lot of that ends up being just a lie. You're doing it because you're selfish. But there is an element as well of doing this for their family. And that's what Kingpin's doing too. So I think there's more depth to this villain than you think in that Godfather, Walter White way.
A lot of villains justify doing terrible things by saying, I'm doing this for my family. Doesn't the Godfather trilogy prove he was never doing it for his family? You know, they really spell it out for you in Breaking Bad. He's a villain who says throughout the entire series, I'm doing this for my family. And then finally, in the end, he's like, I did it for me. Obviously, I did it for me. I ruined all of your lives. This was a selfish act. So I think it's what villains tell themselves they're doing to rationalize their behavior.
Okay, they at least start doing it for their families in those two cases, Michael and Walter. So Miles has to destroy the collider with the other Peter B. Parker later calls the Goober, with the flash drive, which he destroys when he's trying out Spider-Man powers. And yes, we see a Spider-Man get actually killed. So the Chris Pine version in this universe, an upstanding citizen, is killed. Miles buys a costume soon after, whatever, the next day or something, from Stan Lee. And I guess that's the last time Stan Lee ever voiced a character, and he was in so many MCU films. I guess this counts as MCU? Maybe it doesn't technically?
Yeah, the year this film came out, both Stan Lee and Steven Ditko, who was the co-creator of the original Spider-Man comic.
The same year they died.
They both passed away in the same year this film came out, yeah.
Yeah, Steve was in the summer, and Stan was, I think, November, so right before this came out. We've already had so many excellent scenes, but then we start getting some really trippy, cool stuff. When Miles visits this universe Peter, so Chris Pine, that Spider-Man's grave. But then Peter B. Parker shows up. That's the Jake Johnson version, the flawed one, the fat one. I'm fat. I can call him fat.
He's not fat.
Well, he's got a gut on him.
He wears sweatpants.
That's the joke, obviously, is that he's not in good shape. He's given up because his relationship to MJ in his universe, right? It's MJ, not Gwen Stacy?
It's MJ, yeah. It's always MJ.
Well, not always MJ. Depends on look at the...
No, I guess, sorry. But
Garfield
I mean,
ones is Gwen Stacy.
It's MJ and then also Peter Parker in their universe. I think he's married to MJ, but they're in a relationship anyway. Because she's his widow. After he dies, she speaks for him.
Right,
yeah.
and the Peter B. Parker version...
They're divorced.
They're divorced. It's
Peter
MJ.
B. Parker is supposed to be 38, and Peter Parker is supposed to be 26. I only know this because I read it on Wikipedia. Okay. So it could be implied that Peter Parker is going to become Peter B. Parker.
Okay.
One of the main themes of this film that I think they do with such elegance, I don't know how they do it, it's like a magic trick, is the fact that Spider-Man itself is played out. Spider-Man the character, Spider-Man the franchise, good lord, who in their right mind said, let's add more Spider-Man movies to the growing massive list of Spider-Man movies. So imagine you're a filmmaker being asked to create yet another Spider-Man film with yet another new cast, yet another origin story of a kid getting bit by a radioactive spider, learning how to use his newfound powers. This was the 4th Spider-Man reboot in 16 years! Audiences could not possibly have been hyped about it, so what's a storyteller to do? And one of the many strokes of genius of the film is to begin with a Spider-Man who is himself over it, and I'm talking about Peter Parker. I'm going to tell you this one last time. That's how he starts it. He's 26, and he's already like, oh, God,
Is this
okay.
meta?
Yeah, we're going to do this one last time. And he rushes through the story we've all heard ad nauseum. Immediately, audiences are relieved that they don't need to pretend to be surprised when Uncle Ben dies, but also we're introduced briefly to a Spider-Man who's also bored of the whole thing. The story is old news. His life, which he loves, as exciting as it may be, has become routine. He always gets back up. He doesn't even bother naming MacGuffins anymore. It's just the goober. He has a Christmas album. That's the ultimate joke. He's done everything. He has jumped the shark. He even has a Christmas album. And maybe this complacency is the reason that he fails. I'm not sure if that's what's implied, but at any rate, the film immediately is letting us know, we know you've seen this a million times. And so if Peter Parker at 26 is already, okay, here we go again. Yep, my life is kind of routine. Then imagine what he's like 12 years later.
When he says heartbroken.
He's 38, he's divorced, he's getting too old for all of it. Maybe he's divorced because he's disillusioned with the whole life, because no matter how many bad guys he kills, there's always a new bad guy. It's all rote. There's probably trauma baked in there somewhere. And he's so played out that he's depressed, he's eating pizza, he's wearing sweatpants.
And so often he's fighting all these guys by himself, because when Miles goes back to the subway where the graffiti was done with his Uncle Aaron, he's seeing 2 villains. And Green Goblin's this monstrous, huge thing. And of course, Kingpin's already as wide as he is tall, versus this one guy. No wonder he loses. He should lose more often in these stories.
But he says, I always get back up until he doesn't. So it's an interesting take that he has this overconfidence, perhaps, because he's just been through it so many times that it's rote for him. So Spider-Man dies, and then we're treated to this blank slate where we don't know what's going to happen. And then the trick is of the film is that they deliver us the same story beats, that it was just lampooning, but so adeptly that we don't care. Uncle Ben becomes Uncle Aaron, but it's such a well-drawn character arc that it doesn't matter. And it helps that it's wrapped up in this incredibly funny and imaginative package.
And briefly, Uncle Aaron is the Prowler. Well, maybe not just briefly, but in the story.
Yeah. He's so
brief.
different from Uncle Ben, right? Uncle Ben was kind of a scold. Uncle Ben
But a good man, and the Prowler is a villain.
A good man. The reason that's an inciting incident is because it's this nuclear level guilt trip, because Peter always feels like he's responsible for Uncle Ben dying. Whereas I don't get that vibe from Miles. Instead, it's more like Aaron is an example of how you could go astray, how you could use your prowess to become the Prowler. Mm. He loves Uncle Aaron, but instead it pushes him towards his dad, the person who loved him so much and is the good influence on his life, the good role model. It's also a movie very much about role models. He looks up to Aaron. He's looking up to Peter, the first Peter, and Peter B. Parker. They only get him so far, though. Even whatever he gets from his great relationship with his father is not going to help him be Spider-Man. None of these role models are adequate on their own. He needs to make sense of what to take from each role model, and he needs to be patient about the time it takes to meet them at their level, too. And when Miles comes into his own, it's his dad who gets him there, not Aaron, because Aaron was astray, and that may have motivated him in one way, but it actually also scared him and set him back. They have that beautiful moment through his dorm room door where his dad is reaching out to him and basically says, I love you, I'm trying my best, I love the person you are. The next thing he does is goes to Aunt May's, gets his costume, and importantly, modifies it to make it his own, too.
What's smart there that why isn't Miles answering? Because we've seen this in rom-coms forever, which is, fine, be that way. But Jefferson thinks his son's mad at him, so he's giving him the silent treatment. But he literally can't talk because his mouth has a web over it from Peter B. Parker. And he also has we haven't really talked about the superpowers, but he's got the Venom touch thing, which is what he uses on Kingpin at the end to supercharge him, and then that's part of what beats him. But also the invisible thing, which I guess are from the comics, those two talents. I don't think Spider-Man ever had those in anything I've ever seen before with Spider-Man.
Yeah, I guess we have to confess that neither of us have read any of these comics, but I think they drew really heavily from the Miles Morales series. I think there are comics about the other Spider-Mans, like Peter Porker and Penny. There's definitely a Gwen Stacy series. She has a pretty elaborate story.
The finger thing means the money, Bev.
This is a comic book that's been made since the early 60s. There's a lot of talent and a lot of years and a lot of money that has been made off of this particular universe.
And he may be the favorite superhero of... It's hard to know. You have to poll everyone, I guess, and they'd all have to give an honest answer. But I think maybe Spider-Man, if not the most popular superhero in all of comic bookdom, is certainly the top 3 or 4. Batman and Superman certainly are there too. And
I think like between Batman and Spider-Man, really, they're the two.
You talked about the reboots. Yeah, there were so many movies just in that short period of time because they brought Tom Holland in to play Spider-Man in Civil War, which I think was 2016. And then this is 2018. Infinity War is 2018 also, where it's Holland, not... I haven't said his name. Shameik Moore is the guy who voices Miles Morales and will do so in the sequel. Most of these people return. I don't think Lily Tomlin's coming back as Aunt May. I don't see her name in the credits. Maybe there's going to be a surprise, but most of these people, the major ones... Actually, I don't know if we're seeing Cage or Mulaney again either. But Haley Steinfeld comes back, and Shameik Moore and Tyree Henry and some of those major people are back in the sequel. So you had Holland's first appearance in 16, and this is after the Garfield ones. What were those years? 2012, 2014 maybe? I forget exactly. But 16... Then 18 and 18, the same year with 2 different Spider-Mens. Then Endgame was 2019. And then they did Far From Home at the end of 2021, I believe it was. One of the few movies that really truly succeeded during the pandemic era, which I guess we're still in, before Top Gun last year. And then Spider-Man's also a part of Doctor Strange.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right? No, Doctor Strange is in his movie. I've got that backwards. That's the point. I'm lost. There's so many Spider-Men.
Yeah.
And people have loved it. Huge hits. And they got 3 of the Spider-Man characters in No Way Home. I don't know if I said Far From Home, but that was No Way Home, the most recent one that Holland did as his own movie.
Just an aside, little ponderance here. Why do you think Spider-Man is so popular?
I think because of a lot of factors. One is because he's such an underdog, much like Miles. He has powers, yes, but he's still a kid, which is unusual in the comic book lore, I think, generally speaking. I'm sure there are a lot of examples of kids that are superheroes, but the major ones that every person knows, we ask our parents, they're going to know Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, a lot of the villains, of course, too. They're not going to know these lesser characters that some comic book guy, well, actually, type person says, these are the 5 greatest comic book characters that most people don't know.
I'd say there's a major exception with the X-Men universe where there's lots of teenagers in the X-Men
there you
universe.
go, right, but not well known by the average person.
No, fair enough.
So he's still basically a kid. He's broke, especially in the Tobey Maguire ones. He's trying to just make it as a kid, living in New York City. But then he also has this job, fighting alone, always, until the Avengers stuff. But that's not in the Tobey Maguire movies, and it's not in the Garfield ones. If they have help, it's not much, not compared to what they're fighting against. So there's that. He's such an underdog, even with his great powers. Sense of humor.
Oh, he's always funny.
Dad jokes type stuff. But still, there's a sense of humor there. Tom Holland, one of the reasons why he was so good, or has been so good, and I'm sure will always be as long as he plays Spider-Man, the very first time he plays him in Captain America Civil War, Winter Soldier throws a punch at him. He catches it with his hand and says, "Metal arm, that's so cool!" in the middle of this, what could be a mortal fight with this guy. It's things like that that make this character so much fun. He's got a cool suit, I guess, is part of it, too. The ultimate humanity.
He always has very relatable problems on top of his superhero problems. He has the same problems that you and I have, or at least had when we were young adults like that.
Bruce Wayne, none of those things. Bruce Wayne and Spider-Man, or Batman and Spider-Man, might be as opposite as it gets.
Yeah, Bruce Wayne has no superpowers. Batman has no actual superpowers. He's completely unrelatable because he's a billionaire right from the jump. He's this strange, angry, dour guy. Never funny, always modeling. And Spider-Man is a broke, funny kid with friends, with a life, with a job delivering pizza or photographing for a newspaper. He's irreverent and he's so light and fun. There's something about him that just fuels my inner child way more than Batman ever does.
So as good as Shameik Moore is in this as Spider-Man, he hasn't really done that much, by the way. I looked at his resume. He's pretty much only done, 30 episodes of Wu-Tang: An American Saga, which is based on, of course, on the Wu-Tang Clan. And they've got actors playing those characters. He'll be in, apparently there's 2 sequels because the composer has 2 upcoming credits. Daniel Pemberton is the composer on Beyond Spider-Verse, and of course it's Across the Spider-Verse that's next. So Beyond the Spider-Verse is the one after that.
I think while they were in production of the sequel, they decided to split it into 2 sequels because the story was just getting too big. And I think I also read that there's going to be a spin-off. Which, of course, there could be. There's so many Spider-Mans to work with. And they even introduced more Spider-Mans in the very end. They introduced Miguel O'Hara, who is Spider-Man 2099. Oscar Isaac is voicing him in that little bit at the very tail end.
Okay.
So it could be an Easter egg for where they intend the series to go, but who knows?
But as great as all the characters are, we haven't really talked yet about Gwen Stacy. Haley Steinfeld, her debut was True Grit. Maybe still the best thing she's ever done.
Oscar nominated for it.
Right,
and
right out of the
she's
chute.
wonderful in that movie.
And she's also now in the MCU playing Kate Bishop on Hawkeye. You were never a Hawkeye fan, and yet I think you would agree with me. That's one of the best series they've made so far.
Agreed. I
and
almost didn't watch it because I don't love Hawkeye.
And he was fine in that, but the best things in it were the two girls, or the two young women at least. It was Haley Steinfeld and Florence Pugh.
It's her show, Haley Steinfeld.
But then Pugh also made it great too.
Oh, yeah.
2 or 3 episodes that she was in that as well. Her voicing Gwen in this, she's in the next one as well. Maybe they're going to start building up some kind of relationship with the two of them. I assume you liked her performance? Her voice performance?
Yeah, I think all the voice performances are out of this world. I'm surprised that we haven't seen more from Shameik Moore. Maybe he's a theater guy. That's what I always assume when you see someone, they're so talented.
But we won't see him. That's a big part of this, though.
Oh, sure, but he has an agent, and this film was huge, and even if it was just voice acting, you think that he would pick up Lost Markets.
He also dares to be black.
Yeah, there's going to be fewer projects
That's
always.
better than it used to be, but still not great necessarily. Yeah, she does a great job, too. I said I like Cage the most in our trivia thing, or our opinion thing. I guess partly because, even though he's not in it that much, the way they draw him is so cool. He pulls a gun at one point, which you don't see Spider-Man ever do. But they all seem like they're a little bit goofy. Every one of them. Maybe not so much Gwen, but Spider-Ham obviously is. Penny is silly in her own way, too.
I love her.
They all can get serious when they need to. Peter B. Parker is pretty silly as well. Gwen, I guess, yeah, she is the most serious one because she has to carry the story more than the other pulled into this universe Spider people. She has so much more to do than they do.
She's kind of like the straight man of the group and
Right.
the most serious member of the group, the de facto leader, even though you think Peter B. Parker would be the leader. But she's way more together than he is.
But a very critical thing in this, of course, is Aunt May. Lily Tomlin voices her. And her Shaq,
Great take on Aunt May.
because Ben, of course, has been dead. And she doesn't seem like she's really mourning Peter that much. She knows she's got a job to do. And I guess all the Spider characters went to her because they're there when Miles goes and finds her. And you already said he goes to get his costume at her little shack. I'm surprised Lily Tomlin didn't come back because I feel like she could be a fairly major player again. But
Well, I think that the sequel takes place in a different multiverse. So it could make sense that we wouldn't need to go back to her.
Okay.
Or maybe there's a different Aunt May played by a different actor.
That could be. And a key story point is that Jefferson thinks that Spider-Man, not knowing it's Miles, killed Aaron. But of course it's Kingpin who did. Prowler was his henchman, didn't do his job properly, didn't kill Spider-Man when he realized, oh my god, that's my nephew underneath that mask. And that's why he doesn't kill him, but then he gets killed for it. It's funny that Alice gets such a small role in this, because he would have been a good Kingpin voice too. It would have been interesting if they'd cast him as the Kingpin voice. And if he's in the sequel, I don't know, you have to have him in flashbacks, I guess, or some other version of Uncle Aaron, I guess, because it's a really good performance, but he doesn't get that much to do in this because he's dead so fast.
Sometimes it can seem like big actors will take these small parts in animated films, and I wonder if part of it is just, here's a paycheck to be part of this cool franchise where you're probably going to have to spend a grand total of 2 weeks in a sound booth, including rehearsals and everything. It's such a low commitment for actors. They don't even have to get into makeup.
Pretty juicy role, too.
And a juicy role, yeah. It's fun, it's easy, and you're in and you're out, and it's probably really easy to fit into your schedule, too, because if they need pickups, all you need to do is find a sound booth, and you could record it anywhere, even if you're on location or whatever else you're doing that you're busy with.
So Aaron's out of the picture now. We get the big clash at the end where they've got to stop the collider from being used again. Who killed... Oh, yeah, Doc Ock is killed. Well, Olivia Ock, if you will, gets killed by... Is it a bus?
Yeah, bus or truck or something. It's pretty funny, actually.
Mean Girls. Although she doesn't die in Mean Girls, but...
And that's Catherine Hahn.
Catherine Hahn, who I was never a big fan of. I think she lays down way too thick, generally speaking. She's in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. We covered that a long time ago. She's done a lot of comedy work. I haven't always loved it. But she is great, again, MCU, in WandaVision. Because she's laying on thick, but that was for a purpose. And then when she becomes, spoiler alert, but that is, 2 years ago? Maybe more than that? It was the very first MCU show. She turns into Agatha the Witch. It was her all along. She's pretty awesome in that show, and I'm looking forward to seeing her be in the MCU in the future, which she's going to have to be at some point, I would think. But she's not involved in the finale, and of course the Goblin's not involved in the finale, and various Spider-Mens have either died. Well, then almost all of them gone through the portal before the big fight between Kingpin and Miles. It's Miles versus Kingpin only. Mano a mano, little guy versus giant guy. But he has the black suit. He's mastered his powers now. Happens pretty fast. You do get that awesome shot where he's upside down going into the city. It's on the poster, I believe.
Awesome doesn't begin to describe that masterpiece of a shot. That's too short, but God, what a gorgeous image.
And actually, if I'm right, they have the city upside down, which means he's facing up. But of course, he's the one that's going down.
He's floating towards the city. Yeah. Breathtaking.
And he actually does meet this universe's MJ.
Zoe Kravitz.
Right, Zoe Kravitz doesn't have a lot of screen time. She's really highly ranked in the credits considering she's not in the movie that much.
And she played Catwoman. All these people have...
And she's in X-Men First Class.
Is she really?
She's in multiple superhero movies.
Wow. But I wonder if they cast her because they intend to give her a bigger part in the sequels.
Probably, yeah. Mm-hmm. Jefferson happens to come on the scene and sees the collider being destroyed and realizes, no, Spider-Man didn't do these bad things. It was actually Kingpin that did them. And I do like the scene at the end, too, when Spider-Man... Not Miles, although it is Miles, but it's not supposed to be Miles. It's just this random character puts on a funny voice. Yes, sir. Thank you for your help. And hugs him. Yeah. I love you. What? Nice callback to the say I love you thing earlier on at the school. Say it. You gotta say it to me. And then, of course, the nice touch. Kingpin is caught in a web, courtesy your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Maybe he'll come back, but he was beaten in this movie. I still think his motivations are not quite as bad.
Okay, well, we can disagree on that. I don't think his motivations are bad. I just think... he's not an interesting character to me.
It's similar to what would have happened in Spider-Man 2 if Doc Ock hadn't been stopped. He's driven crazy by his own arms, and his wife gets killed in the process. But he wants this reactor thing he's tried to create to work. He wants it to help humanity. He's not even really doing it for money or fame. It's, I can, or anyone can make this a better world with this power, this little thing I'm holding in my hands. And in the end, he does the right thing in that movie. Some of that's what's in here, too.
And that obsession with work is the same motivation for Olivia Ock, to put Octavius. That's right. She works for Kingpin. She works for this big bad guy, but it's because she's so into doing the work, and they have this little back and forth argument about, oh, it's my collider. Well, it's actually my collider. They don't really get that deep into her character. I think she's more comic relief villain next to Kingpin's big serious villain.
Yeah.
They managed to still sneak in her motivation there to explain why this esteemed scientist would be working for someone like him.
Jake Johnson does play Peter B. Parker. He was involved in the Lego movie for Lord and Miller and has done many voiceover performances. Is it New Girl? Mm-hmm. Yes, he was in that too. He's done a lot of things, but I don't know what the one thing stands for the most. I guess maybe these movies might at this point. Brian Tyree Henry, as his dad, was nominated this year for Causeway, a movie you haven't seen, but we will pay for Apple Plus again at some point in the next couple of months so we can watch Ted Lasso and some other things, and you can watch Causeway then. Of course, he's best known for Atlanta. I still think one of the best slow burners I've ever seen do anything, especially on TV. Brian Tyree Henry, great at the slow burn. Lily Tomlin was in Nashville in The Player, but she's not in the sequel that I can see so far. Does a great job as Aunt May. I love her stern, no-nonsense crap. Plays it differently, as did Marissa Tomei, playing it so differently than the old Rosemary Harris played it, which is fine. She's an older lady, but then Tomei was so different as this, not young, but still vibrant and sexy, flirtatious with Iron Man. And now you got this whole different version, this stern, older, I'm also a badass myself, which was never the way Aunt May was played, even when Tomei did it. John Mulaney has mostly worked on TV specials, but he has done a fair amount of voiceover work. Nicolas Cage, we covered him so many times before, spread out over the years. Last year we did Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He's got a very small part of that. Moonstruck, one of your favorites, we covered that, I think, probably 2017. Raising Arizona, we covered that a long time ago. Wild at Heart, we did a couple years ago. And Adaptation, one of my very favorite comedies of any era, but especially the last 20 or so years.
I just have to push back at your description of John Mulaney's career as a few TV specials. He's one of the best stand-up comedians working, and he had a legendary run as a writer on SNL. But I'm always looking
for movie credits, and then I'll settle for TV credits if they have more of those or something. I don't really care about their career beyond that, necessarily.
All right, just justice for John Mulaney, because I'm a fan.
Yeah, he's all right. Kimiko Glenn did a lot of TV and voiceover work, so she is Penny Parker, and also many episodes of Orange is the New Black. Liev Schreiber, we've covered him 3 times. Scream, got a small part of that. Spotlight, very important as their boss in that film. And also, I've covered him a few times on Scoring at the Movies with Chris, because he was in Goon and something else I forget right now. Anyway, I didn't write that down. And then Chris Pine, an important part of this movie, but not a huge part of it. This is the first time we've ever covered one of his movies, though. We've never done a Star Trek film or Wonder Woman.
Wow.
Where he is Wonder Woman.
He's one of my many Hollywood crushes.
I think he's the best looking.
My favorite Chris.
He's the best looking Chris, for sure. And they're all good looking guys. I think he's the best looking Chris.
I wouldn't say he's the best looking Chris.
I would.
But he's my favorite. The most my type of all the Chris's.
Well, they're all funny.
Everyone's going to say Chris Hemsworth is the best looking Chris.
Pratt got in shape for the Guardians movies, and that meant that all 4 of them are cut the way that most actors are these days. They're all good looking, and they're all funny.
Yeah, I know.
And Pine is underratedly funny.
Agreed.
So we said Bob Persichetti directed this along with Rodney Rothman and Peter Ramsey. Persichetti and Rothman, these are the first two directing credits they've ever had. Peter Ramsey had directed Rise of the Guardians many years before, which is an animated film. The writers Lord and Rothman. Miller didn't get a writing credit on this, but I'm sure he was involved in some way, just not literally as a writer. But Lord and Miller have done so many great things. The Lego movies, the two of them, especially the first one. The Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movies, they were pretty good, especially the first one. And the Jump Street films, both were very funny. I think the sequel was close to being as funny as the first one.
I love the 21 Jump Street movies.
And Rothman was involved in 22 Jump Street. Lord and Miller, Amy Pascal, and Avi Arad were the producers. Stan Lee was an executive producer, of course, like he always was, although because he was at the end of his life, I don't think he was involved in this movie per se, but I think he just got that token credit. It's mostly the same producers for the sequel, but 3 new directors, including Kemp Powers. So the guy who co-directed Soul.
Oh.
They probably wanted a black guy involved because he's that. Although, is it Ramsey? One of these guys on the stage at the Oscars is a black guy. It's Ramsey. That's right. It's him that's black. But now they've got Kemp Powers involved in the sequel. The movie is 239-1. We saw it on Netflix. We probably should own it, but Netflix has it, so we watched it there. Robert Fisher Jr. cut it. He did the 2 Cloudy flicks, but he's not editing or didn't edit Across the Spider-Verse. Somebody else is doing that. And Daniel Pemberton is involved in the sequels, but also did Molly's Game and other Aaron Sorkin films. So, you want to talk about technicals? Let's get into that right now.
This detail blew my mind. When they were creating the look, they knew they wanted to really make something out there and brand new. And so they had an animation team spent an entire year just workshopping the look. They eventually created just 10 seconds of film that they said, okay, this is it. It took them a whole year of experimenting and back and forth just to settle on what they settled on, which I think you will agree is pretty incredible. And that
sounds like Pixar, by the way, probably was similar.
It does sound like Pixar.
And maybe
like the
Disney
way they
back in his day.
take their time. This is a way of working that can be very difficult, time-consuming, and expensive, but can be responsible for the truly great films, especially when we talk about animation. It just takes time. It's just the way it goes.
And a lot of failure, probably, too.
So some of the things that they did, I already talked about how they drew 2D techniques on top of 3D frames. Anybody who watches animation, knows anything about animation, knows most of it is shot in 12 frames per second. Not most of it. Not the high-end Pixar is all 24 frames a second. Often, animated TV shows, especially classically animated, were 12 frames a second. It just saved so much money, and your eye doesn't really notice it. Or it does, but it just associates it with animation, and so you just let it go. So they used 12 frames a second animation and 24 frames together, literally in the same frame. There's a sequence where Miles and Peter B. Parker are swinging from the trees together, and they have the computer between them. And in that scene where they're in the same shot, Miles is being animated 12 frames a second, and Peter is being animated 24 frames a second because Peter is the character who's polished, and Miles is still sloppy. And by the end, after his moment with his dad, when he becomes Spider-Man, Miles begins to be animated in 24 frames a second. Such a cool technique, and you don't notice it when you're watching it, but it just subliminally tells you how to feel about these characters and what they're experiencing.
So a frame-by-frame thing, again, would really help that.
It's really building on these existing properties and this existing culture that we all consume. This is a Spider-Man movie. As much as I think it's the best one, it could never be the first Spider-Man movie you ever watch because it builds so much on the legacy of Spider-Man and the legacy of animation.
This movie did run the risk of being too much.
And for some people, it's probably too much. Yep. It doesn't have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. There have got to be critics out there who just watched it and were like, it was too much. It was just like an explosion of candy in my face all day long. But this is our nephew's favorite movie of all time. Right. He describes being on a long flight once and just watching it over and over and over. He's obsessed. And he's going to film school in the fall. This is going to influence him, and he just adores it. Good. I remember saying you have good taste. Another technique they used is that instead of using blur in either motion or in backgrounds, they did this technique where, if something's moving quickly in the frame, instead of blurring it, if it's someone's arm, you'd see like 3 arms in a single frame. It's a very classical animation way to show fast motion. It's the way that Looney Tunes did it. And instead of a blur in the background, this is a brand new technique, they used deliberately misaligned colors. It's supposed to look like a misprint on a comic book, which is really common because they were so mass-produced. Yeah. And it does look like that. But it also, to me, looks like... I used to have 3D comic books as a kid, and the further away an object is, the further apart the red and blue lines are. Sure. So that's what it looked like to me.
Fitting for Spider-Man, red and blue.
Totally. Sometimes it's red and blue, sometimes it's pink and green. They use these different color palettes, and Miles's color palette is not really red and blue. When he has the sense
No, his
lines-
isn't, but Spider-Man classically.
But yeah, Peter B. Parker's is.
Now, what about how they did the effect that they're almost shorting out? The ones that came from the other universes, Spider-Pig and Spider-Man Noir and so on, and Gwen Stacy for that matter.
You could go through that frame by frame. I think that's just a case of really creative artwork, matched with state-of-the-art, out-of-this-world sound design, some of the best I've ever heard, and the combination of the sound effects that seem to go with the beat of the score, which is incredible, that also blends with the pop songs that they picked.
This movie should have been nominated for more than one Oscar.
It's so incredible, and it's so dense, and there's so much attention to detail. Some other fun details, something called the Kirby Crackle. There was a famous comic book artist named Kirby who invented or perfected the art of using dots to use shading, or the cross-hatching instead, where they use lines to do shading instead of just a gradient. The gradient would be standard in computer animation, but instead they give this classical art look, this comic book look to it. There's more. Anybody who's into animation could
probably read for hours.
Could, like you said, go through it frame by frame, pick apart every little technique.
But I love that this movie's so technical, and yet it's so much fun, and it's such a heart. Pixar at their best did exactly those same things, especially Toy Story, Finding Nemo, and so on. What happens next? Well, he spins a web any size, and he catches thieves just like flies, of course. What happens next with the sequels? I don't know. We're going to find out in a few days when the next one comes out, and then Beyond the Spider-Verse, whenever that comes out as well, I guess. We'll be watching. I'm sure a lot of you will, too. Okay, well, then last thoughts on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Well, we'll let history be the judge, but I think in a sea of superhero movies and shows inundating us with content, this will be the one to rise above and remain a classic. And we've probably only begun to see its influence. It's giving two very powerful genres a much-needed shake-up, and it's so exciting to see.
It's one of the most creative movies anyone's made in any genre in decades, any genre. It's also gratifying that after Lord and Miller were fired from Solo, Ron Howard took over, and the movie's fine. I meant to watch it again. Still haven't done that. They went on to be part of this project. I'm not sure if they were going to do both. I didn't read that, but I've heard a lot of people make it sound like they went from Solo. Okay, fine, we'll do the Spider-Man movie instead. So maybe it's not quite true that that's how it went. But still, the same year as that basically bombed for a Star Wars movie. And then this comes out, it's a hit, and so lauded, and it won an Academy Award. Will the sequel...
Who fires Lord and Miller?
You hired them for their talents of being funny, and then you make a solo movie that's too funny for you. Well, then don't hire Lord and Miller in the first place. They are very funny guys. On Friday, the day Across the Spider-Verse comes out, I will be back at it with a one-man yammer about a bunch of prisoners of war and a comedy made by the great Billy Wilder. It's William Holden headlining Stalag 17. Annie's. But you will be back with me in the chair next Monday. We'll continue this run of S movies as we find out what the good cop Al Pacino is up to against all those dirty coppers in Sidney Lumet's Serpico, which we watched a few hours ago. You've never seen Serpico before. The coming attractions trivia for Serpico. Al Pacino received Oscar nominations for playing gangsters on several occasions, including in the Godfather movies, 1972 and 1974. But how many times was he up for an Academy Award for playing a cop?
All right, so for the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Serpico. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen. We're both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis. Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email, haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com, and don't forget to look us up on YouTube, where you can find our podcast in YouTube form at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Bev, anyone can be a hero. Even you with your bad feet and needing to go to bed at 10 p.m. But if the threat happens during the day and everyone is seated, you could be a hero too. And you could be seen.
Man, really calling me out.
Very narrow scope of herodom. But it can happen to you.
Fairy tales can come true. It can happen to you in a very specific way.
My superpower is going to be being able to walk more than 3 blocks someday. And cut.